George Harrison, the quiet one of the Beatles, is forever remembered by the public for his calm, gentle, and romantic demeanor. But that is only part of the untold story. Basin's smile and wistful eyes was a list of names he despised. From close bandmates to global music legends, some were mocked for their voices, some accused of using spirituality as a gimmick to dress up their music, and some were once friends who ignored or ridiculed them. So, who exactly made it onto George Harrison's hate list? And the final name, surprisingly, was tied to the infamous white powder of Hollywood's backstage scene. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943 in Liverpool. Growing up in a working-class family, Harrison inherited his love of music from his mother and soon revealed a natural talent. He left school at 16 to apprentice as an electrician, later joining the Quarrymen on tour in 1960. No one could have guessed that this trip would lead him to become one of the Fab Four and secure his place in music history. On stage, George Harrison stood out for his serious, focused, and quiet manner, earning the press nickname, the Quiet Beatle. That nickname stuck even more firmly after one incident just days before the Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Harrison came down with a severe throat infection. The actor ordered complete silence until the performance. That night was not only a legendary debut, but also the beginning of a quiet image that haunted him for his entire career. But quiet didn't mean submissive on tour. George's reserved personality clashed with the louder, more dominant energy of the other members, and it was there that simmering tensions began. Even as he matured as a songwriter, Harrison was still allowed only 2 or 3 songs per album. The media almost entirely overlooked him. Each time one of his songs was cut or relegated to the B-side, the disappointment deepened. The sense of being undervalued came not only from within the band, but from how the music industry treated him. Over time, these wounds accumulated into deep resentment, eventually hardening into decades-long grudges. 1. Elvis Presley, the shattering of a childhood idol. In early 1950s, a seemingly random moment would shape the life of young George Harrison. While riding his bike past a house, he heard the sound of Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. Just a few notes, but it was like a flash of light in the mind of the Liverpool teenager. From that moment on, rock and roll wasn't just music, it was the pulse in his veins. Harrison later recalled, "When I first heard Elvis, I knew I was never going to be the same again." Throughout his youth, alongside the other Beatles, Harrison was deeply influenced by Elvis Presley. The image of the young man with a guitar, raw vocals, and a rebellious swagger became for him the embodiment of music that could change a life. But more than a decade later, in the 1970s, when Harrison finally met his idol, that image began to crumble. Instead of the free-spirited Elvis of old, he saw a man in a glittering white jumpsuit surrounded by female backup singers and blaring trumpets, everything wrapped in the glitz of the Las Vegas stage. After the meeting, Harrison sighed to friends. "I just wanted to tell him, put on some jeans, a black shirt, drop the backup singers and the trumpets, and go play. That's all right, mama, like you used to." According to a member of the entourage, that remark reached Elvis. He was said to have given a cold smile and muttered to someone nearby, "If he thinks I'm going back to playing in little bars just to please somebody, then he doesn't know a thing about Elvis Presley." From that moment, a distance grew between Harrison and Elvis. For Harrison, it was regret for a purity that had vanished. For Elvis, it was irritation at being criticized by a young English kid while still ruling the Las Vegas stage. But Elvis was not the only blow to Harrison's ideals. Within the Beatles themselves, someone who had once been a kindred spirit became a creative rival. Paul McCartney, from brother-in-arms to rival in the Beatles. In the Fab Four, George Harrison and Paul McCartney were the first to find each other. At first, they were just 2 boys riding the same bus, bonding over a shared love of music. They'd sit together, pass the guitar back and forth, work out chords, and practice until their fingers were raw. McCartney affectionately called Harrison his kid brother, but that brotherhood was soon tested and fractured under the glare of the spotlight they had built together. By 1967, with the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, hailed Raz on a masterpiece. McCartney's dominant creative imprint was clear. From then on, Paul began asserting near-total leadership, pushing Harrison's contributions to the margins. Before 1969, Harrison constantly struggled to be recognized as an equal to McCartney. His songs were often pushed aside, leading to deep frustration in a songwriter who craved creative freedom. The tension peaked during the Abbey Road sessions in 1969. Harrison fought to defend his work, rejecting McCartney's suggested changes. The situation grew so heated that McCartney later admitted, "The trouble is, I always thought our songs were better than George's, but now his are at least as good as ours." Harrison shot back bluntly, "I'd rather have Willie Weeks play bass than Paul McCartney. That's the truth. I respect Paul, He's a great bass player, but sometimes he's just too overpowering. I'd join a band with John Lennon when Darley Day, but not with Paul. It's not personal. It's about musical direction. In 1974, speaking to BBE Radio, Harisson put it even more sharply. Paul has ruined me as a guitar player. Yet, despite their spats, Harisson admitted there was a strange bond between them. I just know that no matter what we've been through, there's always something that ties us together. McCartney and Harisson could still wear the old brotherhood mask, but with another Beatle, things became far more bitter. 3. John Lennon from idol to thorn in the side. While the public was captivated by the rivalry between Lennon and McCartney, there was another quieter battle simmering beneath the surface between George Harisson and John Lennon. Their connection began early before the Beatles found fame. George once admired Lennon's wit and creative brilliance, but that admiration was gradually eroded by Lennon's towering presence and dismissive attitude. As the band grew, the balance of power among the members shifted. Even as Harisson matured as a songwriter, he was often pushed to the sidelines, and Lennon rarely hid his indifference. On one occasion, when George brought in a new demo, Lennon merely shrugged and said, it's fine, but it's not something I'd listen to. By the Beatles' final years, the gap had widened. Lennon openly belittled George's spiritual journey, mocking his devotion to music and Indian mysticism. During one recording session, as George tried to explain the meaning behind a lyric, Lennon cut in, "Don't start telling me about those Indian saints again." George Harisson grew increasingly bitter at Lennon's lack of respect and warmth. Gone were the friendly conversations. Their interactions had become terse and distant. In later interviews, Harisson admitted Lennon could be difficult, even selfish. In his memoir, I, Me, Mine, George almost entirely omitted John's name, a silence heavier than any direct criticism. When asked why, he simply smiled and said, "Some things don't need to be mentioned." And although Harisson mourned Lennon's death, he never tried to sugarcoat the past or hide the wounds that had never healed. But his irritations weren't limited to his Beatles brothers. Outside the band, another famous artist's voice drove him up the wall. 4. Neil Young of Was George Harisson couldn't stand. George Harisson was remembered as the quiet Beatle, rarely showing open irritation. But in 1992, in a rare moment, he revealed a sharper, more uncompromising side when discussing a fellow musician during a recording session with Bob Geldof when asked about Neil Young. Harisson didn't hesitate. "I'm not a Neil Young fan. I hate it. Yeah, I can't stand it." He didn't stop there. He went straight for what he saw as the biggest flaw. "The main thing is his voice. I like a couple of his songs, but I hate that voice worse than mine." Even this wasn't just casual criticism. It was a direct strike at the core of an artist's identity, his voice and performance style. Harisson even mimicked Neil Young's distinctive guitar style right there in the studio, then sneered, "It's just laughable." He does a solo in the middle of a song, and I look at Eric and say, "What's that about?" That same year, fate placed George Harisson and Neil Young on the same stage at Bobfest, the 30th anniversary of Bob Dylan. Dozens of major artists gathered to honor Dylan, but backstage, the atmosphere between Harisson and Young was noticeably cool. George kept his distance, rarely making eye contact for more than a few seconds. Neil Young wasn't oblivious. Music journalists at the time reported that Young had heard about Harrison's disparaging comments. Yet instead of lashing out, Neil simply let it go. In front of the cameras, he still smiled and spoke of the Beatles with unwavering respect. "They changed everything. I'll always be grateful they opened doors for all of us." When asked directly about Harrison's negative remarks, Neil shrugged. "Everyone's entitled to an opinion. I didn't like certain artists when I first heard them either, but time changes how you see things." On stage that night, when it came time to sing together, Neil stood close to George, smiling and singing as if he had never heard a word of criticism. Harisson, for his part, didn't appear friendly, but he also didn't openly make things difficult. They played for the audience, though everyone knew there was a gap between them. For Harisson, sometimes it wasn't just about the voice. With one member of The Who, it went much deeper because in his eyes, that person was a false prophet, 5 being the false prophet in George Harrison's eyes during the height of the counterculture movement, when peace and spiritual ideals were celebrated everywhere. George Harisson held to one unshakable principle: never compromise with what he saw as falsehood. For Harisson, music and spirituality were not parallel concepts. They were paths that had to be walked with absolute sincerity. Pete Townshend, lead guitarist of The Who, was one of the era's biggest rock icons. He was known for his windmill arm swings on the guitar, his thunderous playing, and his use of spiritual themes in The Who's rock opera Tommy. Townshend openly promoted Meher Baba's teachings, speaking of enlightenment, compassion, and peace. But to Harisson, behind the lofty words was something fake. In 1966, in an interview with India Today, Harrison fired a direct shot at Townshend's image. Town's hand. Yeah, every time I have met him, he's been stoned. Talking rubbish. I don't think he's serious about all that religion stuff. While Harrison Bowen's spirituality was a performance, a religious costume for the crowd, devoid of true inner light, he saw it as a betrayal of art and a stain on the culture he wanted to protect. The tension was deepened by an offstage detail. Pete Townshend had quietly helped Eric Clapton pursue Pattie Boyd, Harrison's first wife, inspiring Clapton's famous love song, Layla. Though Harrison never publicly blamed Townshend, it was hard to imagine the incident leaving no mark. This conflict wasn't just about who played guitar better or who had more influence. It was a clash between the sacred and the superficial, between pretense and truth. In a world of dazzling music, where stage lights could easily obscure the core, George Harrison remained determined to seek purity and to speak out, even if it meant confronting some of rock's most powerful names. And then when Britpop ruled the charts, Harrison crossed paths with a new phenomenon. But instead of being impressed, he saw excess baggage. 6. Liam Gallagher, Britpop frontman, or just excess baggage for Oasis. During the Britpop explosion of the 1990s, Oasis was hailed as the heirs to the Beatles, a title that was both an honor and a massive shadow over any British band. The public hoped for a symbolic connection between two generations of legends, but George Harrison wasn't interested. He had no enthusiasm for the comparison. In 1996, in an interview with Independent Radio News, Harrison didn't hold back when talking about Liam Gallagher, the outspoken frontman of Oasis. He seems a bit out of date and rather silly. Then came the direct blow to Liam's role in the band. I think it's been proven when you see the band without him holding a microphone. He's just excess baggage. This wasn't just personal criticism, it was a dismissal of the entire Britpop hype surrounding Oasis, and to make sure his view wasn't misunderstood. In 1997, during an interview with Le Figaro France, Harrison summed it up with a single sharp line. They were not very interesting. For someone like Liam Gallagher, this was practically a public challenge. Unable to sit quietly, he shot back on MTV News, turning the spat into a headline across music media. I still love the Beatles, but personally, I think he's a bavard clown. If I saw him, I'd tell him straight. A proper clown. Liam didn't stop there. He went on to jab at Harrison's judgment. He just reads the papers, so he's the one who's really out of touch. From then on, the gap between the Beatles generation and the Britpop generation became more visible than ever. If fans had hoped for a historic handshake between two British icons, Harrison and Liam turned it into a public war of words instead. Still, not all of Harrison's feuds came from clashing egos or bold words, because there was one case far more complicated involving disappointment in music in the shadow of drugs. M7. Elton John disliked for cookie-cutter music and a brush with drugs. In the press, George Harrison and Elton John appeared to be friends. They performed together, attended parties, and shared moments easily labeled close by the media. But behind the polite smiles and friendly greetings, the reality was more bitter. They didn't actually like each other much. In 1976, during an interview, Harrison delivered a shockingly blunt opinion. Elton John's music is something I've never thought much of. Every song sounds the same. I think he wrote one good song many years ago. Of course, his music is made to a formula. Throw in some lyrics, 4 chords, shake it up, and you've got another Elton John mega hit. That jab wasn't just casual criticism, it was a deep cut straight to the heart of a man at the peak of his career. Remarkably, Elton never publicly fired back. On the contrary, years later, he even spoke of Harrison with respect. He was the wise man of the Beatles. He found something more valuable than fame, yeah. In his memoir, Me, Elton revealed a private moment. At a party, amid the laughter and the drinks, Harrison looked him straight in the eye and said, "For God's sake, cut down on that marching powder." In the entire room, George was the only one bold enough to say it. Not as a colleague, but like a friend, genuinely concerned. Their relationship was never black or white. Harrison may have been disappointed in Elton's music, but he still respected the man. Elton, even after being publicly criticized, remembered Harrison as a rare voice of honesty, someone immune to the fake flattery of Hollywood. In a glamorous world where praise was often measured for gain, their story was like a genuine scratch on a polished surface, revealing a friendship full of contradictions. Cold, yet caring. Distant, yet brutally honest. Dumb. Have you ever wondered what lies behind all that dazzling glory? If this story has made you see the world from a different perspective, hit like so. We have the motivation to bring you more content that touches the heart. Share this video with the people you love as a reminder that love and sincerity are always worth preserving, even if it means going through loss. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next moving story. Leave a comment to share your feelings, because sometimes your own story could become an inspiration for someone.